Hey everybody, welcome to What the Tech episode 82. I am Andrew Zarian. After a week off, I'm joined by Paul Thurrott, back from his vacation, his trip. How was everything, Paul?
It's good. I was the Chevy Chase character in my own vacation movie this week.
was it that crazy of a trip?
Yeah, well, you go with the kids and.
Well, you traveled, you did the whole West Coast thing, and now you're back. So it should have been fun.
It should have been fun.
At least for the
agree
kids. At least for the kids. Does it get that hard with the kids? I mean, I would imagine.
No, they're good. No, but they're kids, right? So, I mean, they want to do kid things. And I made the mistake at I guess it was at Disney to actually go. I went on Space Mountain and got kind of queasy. And then I went on the next ride, whatever it was, and I got really sick. And I said, well, that's the end of that. And so, my wife had to go on the roller coaster rides with my son, which is about as emasculating as things can get in one's lifetime. So,
can you not do roller? I mean, were you always like this? Is this something new that you?
No, when I was a kid, I used to go on the roller coasters over and over again. I would spend entire days doing that. I don't know when it happened or how it happened, but
it's okay, Paul.
I don't have the stomach for it.
That's all right. I don't leave my house, so it's fine. I'm terrified of going to the mailbox.
Right.
Yeah, we were off last week. We took vacation here at the network, and that's why the Paul wasn't on. We redid some of the equipment, we redid some of the stuff, and it's hard to get back into the swing of things after being off for about 8 days. Just the first time we got to flip that switch, you go, oh, God, no.
Actually, it's not the only reason, but one of the reasons I work when I'm on vacation is because for me to start up again after I let this thing go is impossible.
Well, I would imagine you have the website. Do you have someone that looks after the Win Super site, or it's always you?
No, it's just me. So I people talk about how, you retire and then you miss working and everything. But I'm telling you, if I gave this thing up for a week, you'd never hear from me again.
You're gone.
I would be living in the woods of Idaho somewhere.
I was going to Idaho. I would imagine not some tropical island.
No, I'm not a tropical beach guy.
No. Just gone. Just
disappeared. That would be like me and
cabin.
Drew Bledsoe would be up in the woods of Montana or something. I don't know. It would just. I wouldn't even own anything electronic except for a toaster.
See, there are people that do that, and I find that amazing how they're able to disconnect from everything and never look back. I think Jesse Ventura lives somewhere in Mexico now, and he has nothing. He just has a phone and no TV.
God, I hope that's true.
I think it is true. No, it is true because it was some interview he did, and he was talking about how he just surfs all day.
Sure.
And he lives like in the Baja somewhere, and his neighbor is like 20 miles away, and he's on his own, and he has no TV, nothing. The only way he's connected is when he goes to the village to get the paper.
That's awesome.
I don't know.
Good for him. That's great.
Yeah. I mean, it's something. I don't think I could ever do that, though.
No, but obviously with everything else in life, there's a balance that needs to be struck. And I think you and I both are on the wrong end of one scale, or, one end of the wrong scale. And then the other end is the end where you don't trust any technology at all, obviously. But, we had friends out here recently, and they spent the whole time, each one of them, their face in some iDevice, like they couldn't put them down. They couldn't even watch a TV show without having the iPhone going or the iPad. And it's like, guys, seriously. Like,
it's amazing how even 10 years ago we weren't disconnected.
I don't think it's going to be, or I think it's going to be a while before we understand the kinds of problems that are going to, that will come out of this.
Yeah. I want to remind everybody you could check out Paul's blog on Win Super Site. I was just on there today, and I make sure at least 3 times a week I go on and I start reading the blogs. And you've had a lot's been going on. It's been a crazy week for tech, especially August. The end of August was just bonkers in every possible definition of the word. Between the HP stuff, which we did cover some of it, a lot unfolded since the last time we did a show about a week and a half ago. We're doing the show on Friday today. Generally, we do it on Tuesday afternoons at 4 p.m. We're doing it on Friday at 4 p.m. today. But to just touch on that a little bit, they've kind of backpedaled, right?
HP has, yeah. Well, they didn't communicate this effectively. I think that was the problem.
Who's their PR?
I don't know. The thing that bugs me about the HP, well, I should say, I know these guys pretty well, actually, and this doesn't surprise me. But the thing that bothers me about it is they knew this was coming for months. Mm-hmm. And they had time to prepare for it, and they really just bungled it horribly.
You know what I was going to ask you, and you would know better than many other people because you're involved in this. How soon after the transition of buying Palm to now, did they know that they were going to stop creating the hardware?
I think they must have seen very early on that this thing wasn't going to sell. You know, they really staggered the release of these products out. So all they released really was that very small phone, whose name I forget, the Veer, maybe the very small WebOS phone.
Yeah, the Veer.
And then they released the touchpad in June.
They didn't do anything with the Pre 3?
Well,
no, that was Europe.
There will be, actually. I think in Europe they'll release it. I mean, they were working on it, but I think they got this indication as time went on that this was not going so well. And I suspect internally they said, look, we've already made it. Probably a lot of the work was already done at Palm. Let's push out the tablet and see what happens. And if this thing doesn't go the way we want it to within the first 30 days or 60 days perhaps, then this is the end of that. And that's exactly what happened. But to be honest, I actually think it's deeper than that, because the guy that took over for HP's CEO...
Yeah, he's not a hardware guy.
No. And, you know, I guess in the context of HP's entire history, what he's doing actually makes plenty of sense. The problem is, in our own lifetimes, in that context, what HP has been is one of the world's biggest PC makers and server makers. And it's a little hard to reconcile what they're doing with that, you know, and I feel bad about that. I didn't ever think that this WebOS thing was going to be hugely successful for HP, but it at least was in keeping with this notion that they were a hardware maker and that it made sense for them to want to take control of their own destiny. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, and this is something I'm very curious to hear about, I think somewhere down the road there'll be some insider accounts of this stuff. You know, Microsoft and HP were the closest possible partners you can imagine. More so than most people, I think, even realize. Back in the Longhorn timeframe, for example, the companies got together and co-created these new initiatives that were going to combine hardware and software together. They did something like the Athena PC, which was a knowledge worker PC based on what was going to be at the time the next version of Windows and HP hardware. They did all these hardware specs, reference specs. HP followed Microsoft on every possible platform that they made. Released every single kind of product that, you know, that would be based on Microsoft technology. And at some point, somewhere in there, I don't know if it was this guy, it was probably during Mark Rudd's time frame, I guess, that something happened. You know, they were not as close as they used to be, and now here we are today. It's a very strange outcome, very, very unexpected.
Yeah, from that initial report, we would have all assumed that, you know, they're selling the PC division and WebOS is totally dead, but they kind of they've kind of stepped back and said, no, that's wrong. We're not killing PCs. We're looking to potentially spin it off, or, you know, create
or even spin off part of it.
Yeah, spin off part of it.
One of the possible outcomes is they get rid of the consumer part of it, which actually would make plenty of sense for HP, I think, and just focus on the corporate market, which is kind of their bread and butter. And they also screwed up the WebOS announcement, because their intention was not to kill WebOS. Their intention was to just stop selling the devices themselves. They actually still, to this day, fully intend to integrate WebOS into their PCs, which is kind of amazing. And they want to license the OS so that other people can make the hardware. So other people can make the hardware.
Doesn't that make that the touchpad extremely appealing at this point? I mean, I know people are buying it for the $99, and that, you know, but everybody's saying, well, why would you want to buy it? It's a dead platform. It's dead. There's going to be no support. But that's not true. It's not a dead platform. The hardware they're not manufacturing. Well, they are going to make some more.
I actually think it is a dead platform.
You think? What do you think? 12, 18 months? You think it's just not going to continue?
I think it's dead right now.
Okay.
You'd have to be insane unless you were really far along to release anything for WebOS right now. There's just no market there. I think what this has taught us, however, is that, as with the PC market before it, the key to beating Apple in the tablet market is to come up with something that's ridiculously less expensive. You know, when the iPad debuted a couple of years ago, I guess actually it was just a year and a half ago, I complained that the price was too high. And I still look at this thing and I'm amazed, you know, $500, $600, up to $825 for these devices. Mm-hmm. You've got to be kidding me. Like, how could it possibly be that expensive? But then all these competing devices come out and they're all the same price range.
The same, even more. I mean,
So why would anyone spend that much money to buy something that looks like an iPad but is not an iPad?
Yeah.
And so I think what we've learned here with this $99 touchpad is that people will scoop those things up. Now, $99 is not a viable price point, but $199, $299 maybe, especially for a company like Amazon, which is going to come out with some kind of Android-based tablet with Kindle stuff and all the integration with Amazon services.
Do we know anything about what exactly it's going to look like? Is it going to look like Android? Is it going to be their own UI on Android? Do we know anything about the Amazon tablet?
So the rumors that I've heard, and these are sort of all over the map, is that Kindle or Amazon is
Let's
planning
name it all.
three devices, right? Yeah. A successor to the classic Kindle, as we'll now call it, the existing Kindle device, an e-ink screen device, very thin, light, and very inexpensive, $99, And then they'll have a color Kindle that will be based on Android, but won't necessarily run all Android apps. It's really just a way to get the Kindle books onto a color device. So if you have kids' books or the big picture books, that they'll look nice on a color screen. And that they're also going to have a traditional, i.e. iPad-style tablet that will be a full-fledged Android tablet, with all the integration pieces to their services.
I mean, it's a smart move on Amazon's behalf, but the interesting thing is that everybody's supporting this tablet. Everybody's saying, well, this is the one that'll compete with the iPad. And I just don't understand why they're the ones that'll compete with the iPad, not every other tablet. Is it going to be their competitive pricing structure? Is it that their people are speculating that it's going to be $199 or even $299, which is extremely competitive when you're comparing it to $499, $599, $699 for this, very similar device?
I actually think there are two tablet types that are going to take off in the marketplace. One is this Amazon thing, and the other one is a Windows 8 tablet. But
100%. I agree with you on the Windows 8.
The fact that these things are both essentially mythical at this standpoint says a lot, I think, about the iPad and how successful that thing is. But the reason Amazon can compete with Apple is, I guess, multifold, right? There's the price issue. Amazon is very competitive. They'll undercut Apple's pricing, as they always do. That's a given. Whatever price point they come at, it will definitely not be the same price as the iPad. So we know that. And I think there's a certain segment of the population that wants that. Well, actually, that's pretty obvious, isn't it? I mean, obviously everyone wants to save money, but that will be the trigger for them to go buy this device. But Amazon, aside from Microsoft, interestingly, is the only company that has all those back-end services that make up that ecosystem that I think is the true value of these devices, that this thing is really just a portal to the stuff you can do with it, right? And it's not just browsing the web and answering email. It's that store that has all the content, the music, the movies, the TV shows.
Yeah, and to be honest, that's probably the most, if you were to compare any of these devices to the iOS interface, that's the most thing they have in common. They have the music, they have the movies, they even have they have a store that sells goods.
They have a streaming service. I imagine, for example, just you can kind of step through it one service at a time, but just look at something like digital movies and TV shows, right? Both Amazon and Apple have a store where you can buy these things or rent them in the case of movies. They're comparably priced, comparable selection. They have HD and non-HD. It's all very, very, very similar. On the Apple side, they don't have a streaming service, but they do offer you can get Netflix through the Apple stuff. Now, you can get Netflix on some on some Android devices, and that will probably improve over time. But if you're an Amazon customer, and this is something Apple just can't duplicate because they don't have this other stuff. If you subscribe to this Amazon Prime shipping service, which I think is about $80 a year, it gives you automatic 2-day shipping on everything that they sell directly from their own store.
And you get the movie service, the streaming.
You get the movie service for free.
Yeah.
The streaming part of it. Now, what that means is, now, of course, right now it's not as good as Netflix, but it will be over time. Again, Amazon's very aggressive, and this is a business Apple has no business being in, or wants nothing to do with, but Amazon does, and they're going to go right after Netflix. So imagine that this Amazon service is eventually comparable to Netflix, which it should be, but now it's free, and now because you have this Amazon device, you can get that for free on the device. That's a huge advantage, and that's just one service, right? That's just the one thing. They obviously own Audible, so you've got the integration there. I know you can play Audible on an iPad or an iOS device, but again, the billing and all that stuff is actually integrated. And when you buy things from Audible instead of through the Apple Store, it's actually less expensive.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you can kind of step through each one of these services, and you suddenly realize this makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, there is some pros in the Amazon court, but I'm considering to get an Android tablet, but again, I'm not.
I would wait.
For $400, $599.
Yeah.
Really? I mean, I'm not going to spend that much money, and if I am, honestly,
it's
with all the information that's coming out by Windows 8. Windows 8 is the most appealing tablet that has not come out yet.
I know. So, simply because I'm working on a book about Windows 8, I will no doubt buy probably that newly released or newly announced Samsung tablet that's running Windows 7, even though that's a lousy experience. Hoping to install Windows 8 on it, so that makes some sense. That device costs about twice as much as an iPad.
Yeah.
But it's a full-fledged Windows computer.
But do you think that they're going to cost twice as much? So let's say the Windows 8 comes out next year, and the tablets are coming out, right at launch or after, whatever it is. What do we expect the pricing structure to be? Because it is a full-fledged operating system that functions like a computer. Are we going to see pricing in the 1,000 category? I mean, I'm sure we are, but what is the entry level going to be?
It's going to be well under that. Remember,
really?
These things are still PCs. If you go to I'm doing this right now because I want to see. Lenovo, for example, sells netbooks that start at $400. And they also sell ThinkPads that sell for $2,000. And then they sell everything in between. It stands to reason that we will see Windows 8-based tablets that exist somewhere in that range. Now, I'm trying to find it, but I know that, here we go. So they have a tablet. Actually, let me go back to that because they announced another tablet. But they have let's find it. Today they have an IdeaPad.
Yeah,
K1 tablet. It's $449.
Running Android.
Running Android.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
See, my whole idea is that since it is a full-fledged PC, it's going to be more appealing to someone that needs to do everything on it.
But remember, there's going to be Windows 8 running on ARM. And the Windows 8 running on ARM is not going to have that backwards compatibility with existing PC apps like Office 2010 or whatever. Mm-hmm. And that's okay because that version of the OS is going to be sold on these really inexpensive tablets like this $449. And I would expect a year from now, $349 ARM-based tablet running Windows 8. But the idea being that this is a forward-leaning device, it's going to be device-like. It's going to be like an iPad. There is no doubt that Windows 8-based tablets are going to severely undercut the iPad and run the gamut. Right, that you'll be able to buy big ones, expensive ones, more powerful ones, all that stuff.
And again, that's assuming that the UI is something that works.
Yes, I am assuming. I'm definitely assuming that.
Yeah,
yes.
let's assume it's a great UI because we saw some more information come out this week on the blog, Steven Sinofsky's blog, for the developers and about Windows 8, and there was a lot of good stuff. I mean, the ribbon stuff, which. Paul, am I missing something? Like I'm not crazy about the ribbons.
I'm not either. Well, so here's the thing. I think the ribbon has its place. I live in Microsoft Word every day. Microsoft Word is the right app for that kind of ribbon because Microsoft Word has 1,100 commands or whatever the number is. And you need some way to expose those to users. And in that case, the ribbon works really well. You can see how it's less successful in less complex applications. I don't use this anymore, but let me bring up Microsoft Writer, Windows Live Writer is their blog posting tool. It's not horrible, actually, with the ribbon, but it's a simple app, and it really doesn't need that level of complexity, and there's no way to minimize it. So if you're a power user and you want to get that thing out of the way, in that version of the app, in the current version, you can't minimize the ribbon. So I think as far as the Explorer goes in Windows 8, meaning the file management Explorer, not Internet Explorer, that there are basically two types of users that are going to be hitting this thing. Power users who cannot stand the tablet UI and don't want the start screen and all that stuff. They want the Windows desktop. So they're going to be in there. And they're going to look at this convoluted Explorer thing and they're going to say, oh, this is terrible. Mm-hmm. But they can minimize the ribbon.
Okay.
And when you do that, you have this very streamlined UI, and that's nice. The other group of people that's going to hit the desktop are just general users who have legacy apps, or maybe they're at work and work has specified we're only going to use the Windows desktop, for training reasons. We don't have to worry about that stuff. In that case, the ribbon, as bulky as it is and as big as it is, you have to admit, everything's right up front. So
yeah, I'm looking at it right now, and there are people, and we forget, there are people that don't understand how to copy something or how to, create a new folder. There are people that don't understand that you got to right-click and click on new folder. New folder's right there. And that is actually useful even for me. If I want to create a new folder, I just click on it. It's right there.
Yeah. Or even that certain things are available, One of the way, he used this example of copy path, which is such a crazy command, right? I want to copy the path of the current folder location into the clipboard so I can paste it somewhere else. This has got to be used by some 1% or less of users, and that yet there it is right up front. Now, it's so silly, but there it is. So I cannot explain, but there are things in there where I think people will see those commands, and I've done this myself. I use Word all the time, but yet when you mouse over things in Word and on the ribbon, you discover these commands you didn't even know existed.
Yeah.
So I found it to be very successful in certain circumstances. The other thing I like is it's fairly obvious where to look, right? So if I want to do something like I want to insert the letter E but with an accent on it, how do you do that in Word? Well, there's an insert tab.
Okay.
It's actually not that hard to find now. Whereas before it was like, well, where is this thing? I mean, it's really not bad.
And there was a survey done, right? They did like a blind testing where they looked at what people do and how they interact with this stuff, and that's how they decided to add these features.
I can't stand that kind of thing.
But who were the people? That's what I wonder.
I know,
who was in this survey? Like, who was there?
I believe it was farm animals in a cage or something. I can't. This is it's hard. It's hard to. In the wake of Steve Jobs retiring as CEO, right? There's that one when you have a strong personality who happens to be dead right about design almost all the time. You have this guy who's a dictator and can say, consumers don't know what they want. I will make products and they will want it. And then he's right all the time. So there's one way of doing it. And then you have this focus group approach that Microsoft uses where they say, well, we polled our users and this is what they wanted. And to which I would say, your users have no idea what they want.
But that's been Microsoft's mindset for some time. Give the users what they need and support everything that they've needed.
I always used to say about Apple that if they were to achieve any kind of a success, meaning that lots and lots of people actually use their products, that they would run into the issues that Microsoft ran into, which is that it's hard serving multiple masters. Power users, new users, business users, home users, these people all have different needs and wants and whatnot. And you can't create a single UI that works really well for all of them.
Yeah.
And then, of course, so maybe in that context, you have Microsoft doing these focus groups. That's how they have to do it. I don't know. But Apple has achieved a lot of success since then. And, their kind of single-minded megalomaniac approach to design has actually worked out, hasn't it? So a lot of times in life, the theory doesn't match the reality. And I think there's some evidence here that Apple is onto something and that this kind of design by committee is exactly what makes this kind of ribbon UI. And I just look at this thing and I think it's ugly, it's complicated, there's too many buttons, this is dumb. And it's contrary to the notion that we're reimagining Windows, we're reinventing Windows. And it's like, no, you're not. You're just tossing everything in a big pile.
I think this is just a hybrid OS for the time being until they decide where they're going to totally go for in the next, couple of OSs.
No, that's true. And actually, on that note, it's fascinating in some ways that they would even take the time to change Explorer. I mean, why even bother? It's the secondary UI now.
Sure.
And yet here they are changing it. So I guess give them credit for that. They're at least going for it.
Yeah. But what I want to stick to the Windows stuff, and then you brought up Steve Jobs, which is a big story here. The start menu, and I like the fact that it's supporting mounting ISOs natively, which shows you that. This is interesting. Now, this is specifically for the tablet, and it's for these Ultrabooks, which are not going to have any optical drives.
The thing I'd point out, though, is that this stuff has been around for a while in a way, right?
You could download something, and you could do it.
Well, netbooks came out before Windows Vista shipped, and netbooks don't have optical drives, right? So one of the things they had to do in Vista, and then they actually did better in 7, was support this notion of you can't assume they're going to have an external drive of some kind for installing software. You have to provide some other way to do it. Now, for non-Windows software, for applications, you can assume online stores are coming, downloads and all that. That's fine. But for Windows itself, they've supported this USB-based way to install Windows.
Yeah.
And you see now Apple's doing the same thing. So in Lion, they have that little USB key you can buy or make on your own, and you can install Mac OS X the same way that we've been installing Windows 7 for a couple of years. It makes sense moving forward. There'll be more and more devices like that now, tablets and so forth, that won't have optical drives, and even just full-fledged laptops. I think optical drives are just going away. So I like to see this kind of thing. I think it makes sense. It's logical. You bring in these what are essentially disk image formats like VHD, which is the virtual hard disk for hard.
Well, isn't it if you download because we downloaded Office from Microsoft's whatever the website.
Yeah,
we
store, yeah.
downloaded Office, and I believe it was an ISO file.
Right. And so today, most people probably burn that to disk. There's a tool, I think it's built into Windows 7, if I'm not mistaken, that can just do that natively.
Yeah, what I did, I you know what I didn't burn it, but I actually ordered the $5 backup and got the CD in the mail a couple days
they actually
later.
sent you a CD.
And they actually sent me, like a real CD.
I currently put all of my software installs, including Windows and including Office, on a server, a home server that I have in my house. And I install Windows locally. I don't actually do it over the network right now, although I could jerry-rig that, but I don't do it that way. I usually install over a USB key, even when I install to a computer that has an optical drive, because it's faster. And then I just hit the network, and I go to the software share, and I just go through the list. I have a folder that literally is what, Paul? I just said literally, and then I didn't say what it was literally. It is called, I'm going to go to it now. It's called Always Install Apps, and it's just a collection of apps that I install every single time I blow away my system. It's Microsoft Office, it's Photoshop, it's whatever I put on my computers. And it's a smaller subset of the full software list I have up there in the server. And of course, you're always updating it. So a new version of Zoom comes out, a new version of iTunes, a new version of whatever I use. Obviously, you're always updating these things. Now, most people don't have home servers. Most people don't have this kind of thing. But I think with the exception of the big stuff, and who knows, this could change the next version. Pretty much, don't you just like hit the web and install things anyway? I mean, you go get Chrome or whatever browser you use. You go, a lot of these things you just re-download. We all have fast connections. There's no reason to have this collection of disks everywhere, with all your little setup programs.
I'm trying to think what would be the easiest way to do this on a tablet, right? Like, I'm imagining the functionality of Windows on a tablet. Are we going to start seeing? Are we going to format the tablet? Are we going to have, you know what I mean? Like the things that I do with Windows now, which I have this crazy process where I know 99% of people do not use Windows the way I do, and 99% of people do not need to format every 6 months. But there are some people that are used to this, and there are some people that, if there's any kind of issue, they just do a clean wipe and reinstall. Are these things going to be?
Well,
are they going to move on to the tablet Windows 8
actually,
device?
You're getting into an interesting area because there's a feature in Windows 8 that actually addresses this. So Windows 8 supports built-in. You don't have to plug anything in. It's just built into the OS. You can blow the whole thing away. It saves all of your data and settings and your applications, and then you just reinstall Windows from scratch, and it takes like 10, 15 minutes, I think, tops, and then you're just done and you're back up and running. So it's kind of a disaster recovery solution, but it's built right in. So in many ways, it's an evolution of those things. They added that partition in Windows Vista for recovery purposes.
Which I think it's great. I just did, there were 4 computers that I did some work for family, and each of them had a partition, like a safety little corner of the hard drive. And when I wiped everything out, I just used that, and I didn't need any disk. I didn't need to do anything. It just recovered the thing. And it's become a lot easier, and I imagine it's going to be like that for...
It's easier, but it's not fast.
Yeah,
right? If you buy a computer, like, for example, Lenovo, I got a ThinkPad this year, there's a recovery partition on the hard drive that you can use to literally reinstall everything from scratch. But it blows away everything. So you have to manually back up all of your data, blow the thing away, but the process takes a while, right? It's not 10, 15 minutes.
No,
it's
not at all.
An hour or some lengthy amount of time. It works. And it works. It puts it back to the default factory settings, which may not be what you want, right? Because Lenovo puts junk on there that maybe you don't want, and other PC makers certainly are even worse at that.
I think you know what's interesting. HP now offers, and I did 2 HP machines, and I did 2 Dell 2 HPs, and the HPs offer. Do you want to install Windows with our crap, or do you want it just Windows?
That's great.
Which I found that I haven't seen that from a manufacturer before. From the ones I've done.
Yeah, it's too bad they completely screwed over their PC business. But that's great. And I've actually seen things like that. I mean, so back in the old days when you would have disks, restore disks, some of the PC makers, probably because of space requirements, would have an OS disk and then the apps.
As a user, though, Paul, do you think these bad habits, they're not bad habits, but these things that we're accustomed to, like formatting and defragging, and are these things going to go over to the tablet and to the new version of, because it's a different, I use I'm trying to
How,
phrase
all right,
this,
how,
but
how often do you reset your phone, for example?
you know what? I have Android.
Aside from
so-
breaking the screen and whatnot. I mean, how often do you?
Well, I break it about every 2 weeks, but I have.
Yeah. So and then like alternate weeks, you actually
Yeah.
reformat it.
But I have since the last year. I mean, with the Droid, I've had to reset the phone multiple times. Now, I did install Cyanogen on it, and I am running a different OS, so I am constantly updating them, and I am constantly refreshing it. But I have noticed with Android, I end up doing it a lot more than
Yeah,
I would,
really?
with my iPod Touch.
All right, so it actually surprises me a little bit, but I've been using Windows Phone for the past year or so, and I've actually been impressed with how infrequently I have to blow the thing away. And I think in fact, I almost never have to. A lot of it has just had to do with software testing. I've had to put the beta builds of Mango on there or whatever. If Windows were to achieve that level of reliability over time, you wouldn't have to worry about these things. But I guess the next best approach would be give the user a way to hit like a nuke button. It takes 10 or 15 minutes, and then the thing boots up exactly the way it was before, except everything's working now.
Yeah.
The speed is full, the performance is great, and all that stuff. I think for a lot of people that would be enough, and I think that's what they're trying to achieve in Windows 8. Although,
But do people do that? Is that a normal thing to do? Like, I wonder if normal
No,
users
it's
ever
not.
consider wiping everything.
no, but people, any average user, anyone who uses a PC, especially Windows XP and older, will tell you that these things tend to get slower over time. They'll notice it, right? In fact, I've got a computer sitting here right now I'm going to fix for a friend for the second time in the past 5 years, where pop-ups are occurring and he doesn't know how the stuff got in there.
Oh,
and
is
it's
this the
running
same
slow
friend? The
and-
sing friend as 2 weeks ago?
Yes, I still haven't fixed it. Well, we were on vacation, so I didn't even remember I mentioned that. So, but the point is, he's a normal user. He doesn't know anything about technology. Couldn't care less. It's got Windows XP on it. It's an ancient-looking little Dell computer. So I'll do what I can do, and if it works, I'll tell him it's fine. And if it's not fine, I'll recommend maybe he should buy a new computer. But I think people are just used to that,
Yeah.
And if you could say to people, look, I actually think they've fixed that issue by and large in Windows 7.
Oh, in 7? Oh my God! And I'll be honest. When I first started the network, I had Vista on this machine, and yes, it's a totally different computer, and it's much faster now. But I would have to format every 6 months. With this, I've had it since May, and it's running exactly the way it was in May. So in 7, yes, they have come a long way from Vista.
That's a
and
huge
next-
benefit, I think, for normal people, especially.
Yeah.
I think you and I are a little more compulsive. We probably blow these things away even when they don't need it. But
Yeah, I mean, 5% of when my CPU is running 5% higher, I feel that there's something wrong, and I totally, start over.
I don't know that there's going to be something like this, but I could almost imagine a UI that comes up and says, hey, look, it's from Windows, and it says, we're monitoring the system, and we notice it's now running 11% slower than it did when you first used it. Would you like us to fix this? And you say yes, and it says, well, it will take about 10 minutes. Go grab a sandwich, and then when you come back, everything will be great. And it really reinstall Windows, but you don't know because all of your settings and applications and
Still the
data have
same.
not been touched.
You know what? That's such a brilliant thing, Paul.
Yeah.
Why haven't we seen it?
I don't know.
We're
going to. It's going to be part of Windows
Yeah,
8. What I'm saying is I don't know that that's how it's going to expose itself. I don't really know what the UI is going to look like. I'm just saying that's a capability. So I think this will, I hate to say solve the problem once and for all, but it will certainly be a dramatic improvement.
Yeah, just call the Paul Thurrott button, and everything is fine.
Well, it should look like a nuke from space button or something.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of fanciful ways you can do it. But
the start menu is also different.
well,
Where's
sort of.
programs?
So
Well, the picture I see, I don't see programs.
no, but remember that the start menu is being replaced by the start screen, right? So
Yeah.
what they don't want is to duplicate that UI and have to maintain 2 code bases.
So
So
if-
what they've done is they've truncated it down.
So the UI that we see in this image, is that the classic UI, or is this?
No. That's, in other words, on the classic, I'm already calling it classic, the legacy Windows desktop, the one we actually still use today, but the one that is a secondary UI in Windows 8, they're not going to give you the full start menu because the start menu, i.e. program launching and finding and so forth, is being replaced by that start screen. So they don't want to give you 2 different places to do the same thing. So what they've done is they've just put a different little, it's basically, if I'm not mistaken, it's kind of the menu you see on the shutdown button. So it's things like switch user, log off, lock, restart, whatever.
Yeah.
It's stuff like that.
I'm excited for it, Paul. You know,
Yeah, I am too. I mean,
I've gone through every emotion. At first, I said, "Wow, this is great." I can't, that UI, the new UI. I'm really excited.
I like the idea that this is like the 7 stages of
Yeah.
Greek for something.
I'm really excited to use it on a laptop.
Yeah.
I would love to see what this environment's going to be like, and I'm getting excited. I'm like, well, what if they add the Connect type stuff to the laptops, and you could swipe and you could do this stuff? I mean, it's a realistic concept.
Listen, I could be wrong, but I keep looking at this and I think this is going to work everywhere.
Yeah.
It's going to work awesome on a 30-inch screen on a tower computer. It's going to work awesome on a server. It's going to work awesome.
I mean, the media centers now, it gives a whole new life to media centers, right?
Yeah, this is a perfect UI for the living room. Not that media center is necessarily the perfect solution for the living room, although I don't know if you saw this today, but they admitted today that Windows Media Center will in fact be part of Windows 8. So they
But what are they going to? I hope they I don't. You like the UI of Media Center, right?
I like the UI, but like most people, I don't actually use it.
Yeah.
And the reason, well, there are many reasons for that, but I just don't use it.
I mean, it looks a lot better than 90% of the things out there, especially what the cable companies are giving you. But it's still missing something for me, and I've never been able to figure that out.
It's not seamless for starters. We'll see. You know, if they can, we don't actually know. You know what this Internet TV feature is for the Xbox exactly, but assuming it's some nice central UI for all of the online services you can use to access online videos, they should just do that in Media Center. And there's no reason that those couldn't be the same thing. So some people prefer Windows. Some people prefer the Xbox. I think most people in the living room will, in fact, use the Xbox. But a lot of people, if I remember correctly, even most people who use Media Center actually use it on a laptop, that they just like the environment for watching videos. They just think it's prettier, and they use it with a mouse and a keyboard.
Would we imagine that they would revamp the UI in Media Center, or?
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah. They haven't, I mean, frankly, the last 2 versions haven't been very dramatic.
Yeah, but the Windows 8, the new UI for Windows 8, it's a perfect. For me,
yeah,
I see
right. Why not re-implement it as a full screen HTML based?
Yeah.
You know, yeah.
But you could have different settings. I mean, you could say this is going to be used on a TV in my living room, and you really don't need to deal with, I'm going to call it classic mode again. Classic mode, that's all you deal with, and it might be a little limited compared to what you could do. Unless you
I
turn
hope
it,
so.
I would love to see that, and maybe a Connect feature. It integrates Connect, and you could swipe, and you could do all these things. And in my opinion, this would blow Apple out of the water. I mean, this would be the perfect.
Yeah, this is a little far afield, and it's speculation on my part. But in the old days at Microsoft on the server side, I'll bring this back to what you were talking about. I promise.
No, go ahead. Say whatever you want.
They built GUIs,
Yeah.
interfaces. This is why Windows NT took off as a server. It was much easier to use. It worked like Windows. In more recent years, they've started to do things the way they did them in Unix, where they would build a command line interface for something like, say, Exchange 2010, and then they would build GUIs on top of that. And the GUI was actually a subset of the full amount of capabilities that were available in the product, because the full capabilities were only available to the people who used it from the command line. It's kind of a different way of doing things from Microsoft's perspective. It's not hard to imagine them doing something like that in Windows 8, where in the classic desktop environment, you might have this full version of Windows Media Center or Media Player or whatever it is. And then on the HTML front end from the start screen, you get this simpler front end to that same functionality. It's not going to be 100%, right? But it will be the top 80% that everyone actually uses. It's the same kind of design that they use on the server side today, but applied to the consumer market. And it sort of makes sense. It's sort of like what you were just talking about, that these start screen-based interfaces should be simpler and probably by definition can't have the full functionality that's available, on the traditional app.
Well, with the tablet, aren't they going to kind of keep you in the dark with a lot of the other stuff that you would have on a desktop? Didn't they say something like that, or I'm totally making that up?
It's your option. I think what's going to happen, I think there's going to be layers of Windows 8 usage. The very basic, most basic layer, i.e. usually an ARM-based tablet, but not always, right? Because you could do this on a full major Intel-based computer too. You're just going to use that start screen. It's going to be a lot like an iPad from a usage perspective. And you're going to run apps that are always these beautiful full-screen HTML5 apps. But there is the power of Windows under there. So if you wanted to, even with that little simple tablet, you could plug in a mouse and a keyboard, or use wireless mouse and keyboard, and access not the legacy version of Microsoft Word, but the coming version of Microsoft Word that will be designed for this version of Windows. I think they're going to sell a lot of those. I mean, I think people are going to. I think a lot of people will want to do that. In the middle will be people who mix and match.
Yeah.
And in the beginning, that will be the biggest group, because people are going to want to use these new apps because they're so beautiful, but they're going to have to use the old apps because they have to. I own Office 2010. That's the version I have to use. Sorry, I'm going to have to go back and forth. That's just the way it is. And then there'll be the Luddites on the other end that just don't want anything to do with the new stuff and only want their old stuff.
I mean, I think there's room for both. And I think that Microsoft doing this kind of keeps everybody happy, and it's going to keep the power users happy, and it's going to also introduce a simpler user to this new environment that has an advantage that many of the operating systems in the past have not had.
And, from a hardware perspective, there's a huge group of people, I think, and we're going to find out, who look at an iPad, love the form factor, want it, and then they said, well, yeah, but does this thing run Windows? And you say no, and they're like, yeah, I can't do that. And so I think there's a lot of people like that, and they're going to be very happy with this stuff. But maybe an even bigger audience, or just people like me who are, in fact, just Windows users. I already carry around a fairly bulky laptop and whatnot. If I could just bring imagine just bringing an iPad, but an iPad running Windows 8, that thin, that great of battery life, and then some kind of a Bluetooth keyboard or whatever. That's fantastic.
Sure.
If you can save the weight and whatnot, so for example, on the plane, I pretty much know, with rare exceptions,
what do you take
I'm not
with
getting
you?
work done.
What kind of laptop do you take with you on the go?
So currently, I usually take the one I've been taking lately is the ThinkPad Edge 420S. Mm-hmm. It's a 14-inch laptop. It's full-size keyboard, great ThinkPad keyboard and all that. I love it. I wish, I'm a big guy. I mean, I can't use like a teeny little Sony. Those little Sony things look like phones with the tiny keys on them. But obviously the goal is always thinner, and lighter.
Yeah, I'm looking at it. It's pretty. I mean, it's not that bulky, right?
Well, I don't know. So, I mean, actually, I can show you, because I also have this 11-inch MacBook Air, right? So the difference between these two computers is fairly stark, right? You can see.
Oh my God, yeah.
If you can see them, yeah. I mean,
yeah, it's a huge difference.
And from a thickness perspective, I mean, it's like, it's not even close. I mean, the ThinkPad is maybe 3 times thicker. And then from a weight perspective, I don't know the actual weights, but I mean, this little thing is a third as heavy, maybe. I mean, a half. I don't know. But, obviously for a laptop, what I would like is something like a MacBook Air, but with a full-size Windows keyboard running Windows, and those computers are coming as well. So,
yeah, the Ultrabooks.
Yeah, and hopefully some of them will be the tablet types where the screen pops off and is an iPad type tablet. And
do we understand how important these Ultrabooks are going to be? I mean, I know there was a big headline a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about the Ultrabooks, and Intel's behind it, and this is going to be the next thing between a whatever, a netbook and whatever they were comparing it to. But this is an extremely important market that until recently was non-existent. The netbooks are slow, and people buying it just because it's $299. And to me, it's an impulse buy, or you're buying it just to have another computer. But it's rare for someone to do everything they need to do on a netbook.
Yeah.
The
Ultrabook is a computer. I mean, it's
the Ultrabook is a full-fledged computer that's super thin, and it competes with the Air on a realistic level.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the point. And hopefully goes beyond it, right? Because it's not enough to just duplicate the look and feel of a MacBook Air. That thing needs to have better battery life, which I think it can. It needs to weigh less and be thinner, which is the plan. It needs to run Windows and have a Windows keyboard, which obviously will be the case. It needs to be less expensive. And hopefully they need to really innovate beyond all these things, which I just said, which are obvious, and do the things like, have an iPad-style screen that pops off and is its own device running Windows 8 and the tablet mode and all that. And then you plug it into the keyboard, and it's a full-fledged laptop. That thing I just described is awesome.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I want one so bad. I want it now.
Unfortunately, you can't have one, Paul.
I know.
Can't have it.
But yeah, they're going to happen. I mean, this reminds me, I years and years ago, and I mean literally years and years ago, in the 1980s, my father loved a Mercedes and Toyota just announced or came out with their Lexus brand, right? Remember the Japanese car makers in the 80s launched their luxury brands. I think Acura was first, and then Lexus and Infiniti. And the first Lexus looked exactly like the big Mercedes of the day, but it cost half as much or less than half as much. And I remember my dad saying, they can copy Mercedes all they want, but they're never going to have the resale value and the quality and all that kind of stuff. Now, well, forward just a few years, and then of course to today, Lexuses are just as high quality as any Mercedes, and no one would argue otherwise. So they've completely legitimized this market, and I think that's what the idea, Pat, is Lexus.
Yeah, listen, anything could happen, Paul. Hyundai is now selling a $65,000 car.
Exactly right. Exactly.
I mean,
and it's funny you mentioned that. I use that to as a comparison to the PC market. If you had said to someone in the 1980s or 90s that someday in the future, some of the best looking and best selling cars in the world are going to be made by companies such as Hyundai and Kia, and these companies no one had ever heard of, a long time ago, you would laugh and say that's ridiculous. Today, there is a distinct possibility just a few years down the road that some of the biggest PC makers in the world are going to be companies like Acer and Asus and Samsung. And it's like, what? What happened here? But things change.
I mean, you look at companies like Gateway and Dell and HP, and to a lot of people, they're a turnoff.
Yeah, because, maybe for the same reason that Microsoft is, they have the stench of old-fashioned about them, whether it's real or imagined. They just seem old.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right in that. I want to go to the Steve Jobs story now. I know we're a little late, but we didn't get to cover this because we were both off and you were traveling and a lot happened. We covered it on our other shows, but I want to take a different spin on this. And I don't want to go into his health. And you actually wrote something. Your blog about him on Win Super site was really good, actually. So I actually linked to that on Twitter yesterday, but. The state of Apple and where we see the direction of the company going now is the biggest question as far as, how soon after, he's left.
How soon they fall apart.
Yeah. Not soon how do they fall apart, but how soon does Steve's vision stop and it's Tim Cook's vision or somebody else's vision?
It's done. And this is the thing that I think everyone gets wrong. It's over. It's already over.
You think it's over? You think Tim Cook coming in?
No, it's done. Yeah. And here's the thing. Obviously, there are products that are to be released in the coming months that he was involved with. The next generation of iPods, the new iPhone or iPhones, and then the third generation iPad. I think we can. Everyone. It's obvious, right? And maybe there are a couple of Mac products in there and software, whatever. iCloud obviously has his fingerprints on that.
But don't you think the fundamental beliefs of Steve Jobs and the way things should be done hasn't been embedded in the mindset of Apple as a company?
No, I think it's impossible. That's where I think everyone gets wrong.
Okay.
Obviously, Jobs, one of the many things he did right was hire the right people. The man that he selected and the board agreed with for the CEO is an excellent choice. The best choice that they have. He's a great guy. Smart guy.
Yeah, and who else would it have been? I think
there's no one else.
He was prepped for some time now. I mean, it was
just like there's like the the Steve Jobs mini me like Scott Forrestal or someone like that. But I obviously there's a good team of people there. There's no doubt about it. And people will say, well, these guys knew Steve Jobs. They watched him every day. They saw the way he made decisions. They'll all wear their "What Would Steve Jobs Do" T-shirts. And they will make all their decisions based on that. And that is the most horribly misguided, wrong-headed thing to do, because the truth is Steve Jobs was a special individual. You cannot emulate it. You actually do not know how he would have made a decision based on what you're now looking at. You can't know that. I'm sorry. It's wrong. And you will work on that assumption, and over time, you will just make mistakes. And, the truth is, hopefully he had this conversation with these people where he said, don't do what you think I would do. I put you here because you make good decisions for the products that you're doing. You do what you would do. And if that's the case, once again, they're a diminished company because those guys are not as good as Steve Jobs. So it's already over, is my point. I mean, not like Apple's going to collapse, but this
It's a different era now. It's a different
yes,
time.
we were witnesses to some incredible history for the tech industry. What he accomplished, what he did, in the context of our little world, is historical and is not to be repeated. So
Yeah.
I have no doubt that Apple will continue to be successful. They'll release great products. People loved Apple religiously before he came back. So this will not stop. It's not that. The fans will always be there. People are going to buy the products. They're going to be great. But this is the end of an era, and there's no way to sugarcoat that. I'm sorry. People who think that, what would Steve Jobs do is going to answer the question, they're horribly misguided.
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of reading on this week because I'm curious, and I'm curious to see what the journalists and what a lot of bloggers are thinking. And it's interesting, depending on what side you stand on, how you're perceiving this transition of power. There are many people in the Apple community that look at Steve Jobs as a messiah figure, and they think, now Apple's going to turn into this cult-like, mindset of everything that Steve Jobs does and the Steve Jobs fundamentals, and every CEO has to follow this. And there are other people that say, no, it's not going to happen like that. It's another CEO that comes in, and if he's not doing well, if Tim Cook doesn't perform at the level that Apple expects and the board expects, you know what? Somebody else is going to come in.
Yeah, but even that is a kind of a self-replicating problem, because what if he doesn't do a good job? Then you go through the situation
the
like
90s again.
90s where you're bouncing people out and they're not doing a good job. And I really don't expect the 90s again. And I want to be very clear about that. I expect Apple will be fine.
Well,
they're
Apple,
in a great position.
Financially, Apple is doing a lot better than the 90s.
No, of course. But I think it's going to continue. They'll always have a nice significant portion of the smartphone market. They'll always have a nice significant portion of this kind of tablet/computing market. We'll see whether they're ever going to be a player in the cloud computing market. I would suspect they are.
I did an interview with somebody, and they asked me, list your top 5 CEOs, and Steve Jobs was one of them. And I said, well, I picked Steve Jobs not because I use an Apple, I use a Mac, but he was able to convince all these people that had never used a Mac that they need a Mac. And he did a great job at that, at convincing people that you need this product. Now, whether or not you believe that this happened, but there are a lot of people, when you ask them, they go, well, I would buy a Mac if I bought a computer. Why? Oh, because you don't get viruses. Or, because they're so easy, and they've never used the product.
I have no idea. No, I actually, the same friends I was talking about with the Faces and the iDevices, I had asked the wife a couple of months ago about, it seems like what you're doing, it would be, a Windows computer would be better. And she said, well, no, I know the Windows computer is not better. And I said, well, how do you know that? And she said, well, whatever. And I said, well, how long has it been since you used a Windows computer? Like 2 years.
Yeah.
Then you don't have any idea. But they're so convinced, and it's a beautiful audience to have if you're the guys behind Apple, but they make good stuff. No doubt about it.
Yeah. The reign of Tim Cook is going to be very interesting, because will he make power moves? Will he do, but I don't think there's going to be a revolutionary device that they're going to put out for some time. I think they have some great devices, and they're just going to evolve that. But
right, as they should, right?
Yeah.
Because now they're in that position, and now it's all about circling. Well, it's been like that for a little while, actually, but it's about circling the wagons. Even the iPad was kind of that last play where it was like, the iPad really isn't about this device in many ways. It's really about just another way to sell all their other stuff.
Sure.
Although I don't know, they've created an incredible market where new versions of a Macintosh, which are incredibly expensive, or new versions of an iPad, which is expensive, or new versions of an iPod, which can be fairly inexpensive to somewhat expensive, come out, and these people just buy the new one whether they need it or not. Again, it's an awesome audience to have built, and I give them all the credit in the world for that.
It's interesting, and
yeah,
I'm trying to think back when Bill Gates left Microsoft.
Yep. Well, and you can't remember it, can you?
It was, I remember it, but it wasn't as eventful. And I'm thinking,
because
why
Microsoft
wasn't
did a
it?
better job of managing that transition. They did it over the period of a year, and he didn't have to leave suddenly because of a health issue. Bill Gates also went on to become the world's greatest philanthropist and has dedicated tens of billions of dollars toward eradicating disease and educating people, and will be, I think, remembered in history more for that the Bill Gates bio 100 years from now is going to read something along the lines of an early pioneer in the PC business. Bill Gates went on to, and then it's going to describe all the stuff he did that was really meaningful.
Yeah.
And I think that's his legacy. Steve Jobs, unfortunately, as sick as he's been, I mean, it should have been obvious to anyone just looking at the guy that something was wrong.
Yeah, sure.
Still, his sudden exit was sad, and especially because they've always been so secretive about his health, and then he had to sort of implicitly admit that there was something wrong. He said, I told you that if I couldn't do my job, fulfill my duties, then I would leave, and unfortunately, that day has come, and it's sad. It's sad because it's speculation tinged with something bad happening to somebody that everyone respects and looks up to and treats as a godlike figure. So,
and I mean, Gates started the transition in 2000. I mean, it's been almost 12 years.
Yeah,
and a lot of people don't realize
so in other words,
that.
You do this graceful transition, and it's very, from the outside, simple. I mean, there are stories you can read about when Bill Gates stepped down as CEO.
Yeah.
And, Ballmer had to remind him repeatedly, like, you're not running the show anymore. You need to step back, because he couldn't get, for the first year or whatever, he couldn't not be involved. One thing I'd like, I mean, hopefully, look, I want Steve Jobs to be okay just as a person. I think it would be really cool if he was okay to do it. Some future product announcement. How crazy would it be if Steve Jobs did the keynote? The world would go crazy.
But I mean, hopefully, and we all hope that he's gonna do well with his health and he's gonna start doing a lot better. But I could see that happening, though. I could see them doing that for a major event, and
for the iPhone 5,
whatever it
Absolutely.
is. Yeah, I could see them doing
assuming
that.
He's capable.
But the reality is, those days are less and less now, and but they also have to think about the company as a whole. Tim Cook is a CEO, and it should be him being the face of the company.
Well, except that these events are marketing events. It's very unusual for the CEO of a company to be the guy communicating everything. I mean, it doesn't have to be that guy. Again, it's a new era, so things could be different. We'll see. I would imagine that if it is Tim Cook doing the presentation at the next Apple event, the way he's going to handle it is to hand off the parts of the presentation to the people who are directly involved with the products.
Which they've been doing that. They've been doing that for some time.
Yeah, and I think that's why, because I just don't think he's the type of guy that would want to stand up there for 2 hours and just talk. Steve Jobs was very good at that. That was his whole shtick, and there just aren't many people like that. So there's no way. You're just going to come off looking bad by comparison anyway. So don't try to emulate Steve Jobs. Just be yourself.
It's fascinating how, if you ask anybody, any normal person, who's the CEO of Microsoft?
Oh, they all say Bill Gates.
They'll say Bill Gates, or they'll say I don't know.
Yeah.
But everybody knows Steve Jobs with Apple, and is that a bad thing though? Is that a bad thing for the CEO to have such a?
I don't like the hero worship stuff.
Yeah,
we live in a country where most people don't know who our vice president is, so it shouldn't be surprising.
Don't be ridiculous. We all know Dick Cheney's vice president.
Yeah. Yes. So
I had a conversation with someone that had no idea who our governor was, and was telling me that Governor Pataki did so and so, and I said Governor Pataki has not been the governor for some time now.
I'm sure 90% of the people live in this country think that the capital of New York State is New York City.
Yeah.
So. It's just the way it is. I mean, so whatever. So we're in a tech industry. It's kind of a little portion of the world. It's like a subset. So I think the cult of personality. Well, it worked well for Apple. That he is that guy was a dominant personality. I mean, Bill Gates was, I guess, in his own way, not really the same. I mean,
but Bill Gates was perceived towards the end as some villain, which he was not.
No, but he was also perceived as some kind of tech visionary, which he was not either. And I recall many, many shows where I'd go to a Comdex or later a CES or whatever it was, and Bill Gates would be speaking, and these people would excitedly get in line, and this line would stretch out to the horizon, and talk to people. What are you doing here? Why? Oh, I want to see Bill Gates speak. I can't wait. And of course, not to be cynical, but my reaction would always be, clearly you have never seen Bill Gates speak, because otherwise you would not be excited by this. Guy has a whiny, nasally voice. He's not a particularly compelling speaker. He drones on and on and on. I mean, I have to think every one of these people walked out of there like, oh my God, what the heck was that? Not that he's a bad, I don't mean it like he's a bad guy. I mean, he did what he did. He's great. But Steve Jobs versus Bill Gates, public speaking.
But I think Steve Jobs was also, he had this thing where it was just this worship. No matter how boring or what he said, people were going to listen.
Yeah, and actually, so I don't. Yeah, I didn't want to get too far into the negative stuff. I mean, there's some stuff you could say about Steve Jobs around the fact that he never gave any money to charity and never will, and wasn't a very likable guy, and actually made more mistakes than I think people are willing to give him the discredit for. And frankly, if you were to go back and look at a lot of his speeches, like you said, some of these things, this guy could beat the hell out of a product demo. Here's the new version of iPhoto. You see this transition? Let me show you another transition. He'd go on for like 15, 20 minutes about like photo slideshow transitions or whatever. It was like the most boring, most awful stuff in the world. And people would walk out of that room like they were floating on air.
Well, it's that Apple PR machine. They could convince you to buy a bag of poop.
Yes,
they
could, absolutely, especially if it was signed by Steve Jobs.
Yeah, they'll convince you. I want to do one more story before we wrap up. The AT&T T-Mobile debacle that's happening. You know what? I told people when we first did the story, I said, everybody's so confident this is going to go through. I would be surprised if there wasn't some sort of issue.
Yep.
And the Department of Justice has, stepped in. Now they're not the ones who make the decision. But when the Department of Justice is getting involved, there's a problem.
Usually they can just say, look, we're going to sue you if you don't make a change, and the companies make a change. You don't ever hear about it.
Yeah.
This is how it happens. This time I think they went to him and said, yeah, we're not going to allow this. And then AT&T said, can we do anything to change your mind? They said, nope.
So do you think do you feel that it's over? It's done?
No. I mean, if AT&T wants to pursue this purchase, they will be sued by the U.S. Department of Justice and probably by the FCC as well. The FCC tends to just follow along with whatever the Justice Department does. It's fairly rare because, like I said, most of the time, just the threat is enough to break it up. The DOJ, actually, it was the FCC. Wait, actually, I'm not sure which it was. Maybe the DOJ threatened to sue to block the sale of Intuit to Microsoft in 1992 or 3 or whenever that was. That was enough to scuttle that deal.
Was it the SEC or?
The FCC was the original company and agency involved with the Microsoft antitrust. They handed it off to the DOJ. So I don't remember which one was involved with the Intuit deal. It was one of the two. Doesn't matter. But usually that's enough to prevent this from happening. So I suspect that there are a few possible outcomes here. AT&T may be able to make some concession or a set of concessions that will make this deal okay.
Yeah, I think what they're going to start doing is start throwing in some promises where they're guaranteeing. Well, one of the guarantees is they're going to give away
plans and all that stuff. Because T-Mobile today is the only one of the major carriers that offers certain features to the wireless network. Now, you pay for them in the sense that T-Mobile is not a great network, comparatively speaking, but it does offer some unique choices. So I think part of the concessions would be around continuing those for existing customers or whatever they do. But I just...
Well, also, they're saying that they're going to sell off 25% of T-Mobile's business.
Right, and probably to the local wireless carriers, the Cricket Mobile and those companies.
Which I don't think that does any good. We need two major carriers for each type. I mean, we need two GSM and two CDMA, and they need to compete, and that's the reality of it. One of the arguments was, T-Mobile could go out of business, but we're forgetting it's Deutsche Telekom. That there's tons of money there, and I don't see them going out of business.
Well, but they want nothing to do with the U.S. wireless market.
Yeah,
so if T-Mobile does not get sold to AT&T, first of all, AT&T is going to have to pay them some huge amount of money.
$3 billion.
Yeah, so that's a lot of... It's some good...
It just shows you the confidence that AT&T had at that point. They said, well, no, it's going to work.
I think it was probably because the people on the other side felt like this deal could be scuttled by the government, and they said, well, here's our guarantee that won't happen. The most likely outcome if T-Mobile and AT&T do not merge would be that T-Mobile will be sold to a third party. It would just be a non-major, someone else, just some other company.
Yeah. I don't know. I hope it's weird, but I don't have T-Mobile. I don't know anybody that uses T-Mobile here because it doesn't work in this area. But I would like to see there to be some competition, some serious competition. In New York, we have the big ones, and then we have some little providers like Metro PCS, but they don't. There's no hope for these companies because they don't get the good phones.
Well, they'll always be what they are. It's sort of like the local cable companies.
Yeah.
You see those ads. Get an Android phone for $99 with no contract. You kind of know you're dealing with mom and pop. You know, at that point. But what I'd like to see, frankly, in the phone market is get rid of the CDMA stuff. Go GSM purely. I think 3 carriers would be enough.
Well, they're working on LTE, right? And LTE is based off of CDMA.
Yeah. I think once everything is compatible, and really, and I mean really compatible, that you should be able to take a phone from Verizon and go use it on AT&T and vice versa and all that stuff. When that day comes, I think this multi-carrier thing is going to be a little bit less of a concern, assuming there are regulations and laws that allow people to make those transfers without penalty and all that kind of stuff.
Well, one could only hope, Paul. You could only hope for this.
I'm always hopeful, but I have low expectations.
Yeah, and it's almost time to wrap it up. So I want to thank Paul for coming on. I want to remind all our viewers the show is available in audio and video podcast form on Paul's site, winsupersite.com, and on our site, gfknetwork.com. Next week, I think maybe we should do some viewer questions because I have a whole group of emails that I've been receiving the last couple of weeks from viewers that they want their answers, and we must give it to them. You could also check Paul every Thursday on the Twit Network for Windows Weekly, which I'm a big fan of, with Mary Jo. By the way, you did the show at IAS this week.
Yes.
And IAS is from Queens, and he's from 10 minutes away from me.
He seems very familiar, and I can't quite put my finger on it. He was a good guy.
Yeah, he's actually a local guy. He's from around here, so it's another Queens guy. And I'm glad, because there's not too many of us that are decent people or have left.
I hate most New Yorkers just out of spite, but...
Yeah. Don't worry, I refuse to go into the city. I hate New Yorkers as well. You know what's funny? And before we wrap it up, I got an email from somebody saying, I didn't know Paul lived by you.
Yeah.
And I couldn't understand what that meant. And
which you said, let me explain to you how the internet works.
Yeah. And I'm like, Paul's not actually here. He's far, far away in his, world. And I'm sitting here on an island somewhere. And that's how the internet works. And that's the magic of, the tubes.
It's the tubes.
And I was just, I'm like,
that's awesome.
I wonder how they got that, how they figured that out. So I find it funny. Again, you could go to our website, guysfromqueens.com or gfknetwork.com. You can watch live every Tuesday afternoon at 4 p.m. East. We're doing it on Friday today, so if I'm getting those emails why the show was late, because we're doing it on Friday. But we'll be back to our regular schedule next week on What the Tech. Thank you, everybody. Good night.